Let's look at some examples. In the first example, we are inputting a number and we then simply printing the number that is input. Keep in mind that the input is going to be performed as a string because no conversion is taking place. So that number that's input is now going to be displayed. So let's go into our environment. This is our online GDB. And in this environment, I've already connected to Python 3. As you can see here, we've got Python 3. And I'm going to copy this code and I'm going to paste it into our environment. There it is, input, enter a number, and print num. And if we give this a run, it requests us to enter the number that's coming from line 1, our input. We type a number 10, enter, and then line 2 is executed and it prints 10. So in this example, it's simply inputting a number which will be input as a string and it's printing it as a string. We can't really tell whether it's an integer or a string at this, in this example. Let us now look at the second example. Here we are now inputting two numbers. Again, there's no conversions taking place. So our inputs are as strings, num1, num2. We are summing them up and we are then printing the sum. So if I copy that code and I remove the code in this environment and I paste the new code, and here we are inputting two numbers, summing them up and printing the sum. So let's give this a run. It requests me to enter a number. So the first number I'm inputting is 10. Line 1, press enter. Line 2 is executing. Input a number. I'm now inputting a second number, which is 20. And when I press enter, these two are going to be summed up and we get an answer of 1020. So you can see the 10 and the 20 are simply joined and put together to give us 1020. Why is this the case? Because we are inputting the two numbers and they are being input as strings. So when we are adding them up, they are being added as strings. So in line 1 and line 2, Python is seeing those two variables. Even though we are entering numbers, the input statement will capture those numbers as strings. So num1 and num2 are of string data type. They are summed up and sum will then be also a string data type, which is then printed. Let's now look at the third example. In this example, you can now see we are inputting two numbers. It's exactly the same as the previous example, except that there's now a typecast. So the number that is being input is now converted into an integer in both cases. So when we're summing them up, we're going to be summing up numbers and not strings. So let's copy that code. Let's go back to our environment and remove the previous program. Let's paste this in. Take careful note that there's an input statement which will give you a string. So that's the input giving you a string. And then the typecast, the conversion is taking place by the int. So that converts the string into a number. So when it is stored in the variable num, it is stored as a number. And the same applies to num2. So if we give this a run, you will see it's requesting me to enter a number. Again, I'm going to go 10, enter. At line 2, it wants a second number, 20, enter. And this time around, it's printing the sum of 30. Unlike in the previous example, these are now the input numbers are now converted into integers. So when the sum executes in line 3, it's now summing up numbers in the calculation, and it's not working with strings, as was the case in the previous example. Let's look at the next example. Very similar to the previous one, inputting two numbers that are converted. We are summing them up. The difference here is when I'm printing my output, I am printing a message, and that message is saying the sum of the numbers is, and we are printing the sum. Now the rule here is when we are printing, we have a message which is a string, and we have sum, which is a number. So you cannot display a string and a number. Therefore, a typecast is taking place, which is converting the number which is stored in sum, and that's being converted into a string. So your string plus your string will then give you the answer that you want. Let's copy the code, and let's go into our programming environment and remove the previous code and paste in this new code, and let's give it a run to see what happens in this instance. Line 1, input the number 10. Line 2, input the number 20. And line 3 and line 4 now executes, and there's the message. The sum of the numbers is 30, and there's the message, and there's is the conversion. Now, if you leave out the conversion and you just print sum, if you attempt running that, I enter 10 and then I enter 20, you'll see that it comes up with an error, and it says file main.py. Py is the file extension. All Python programs have the extension py. In line 4, it's having a problem in line 4. Print, and it says type error, can't convert int object to string. So it's having a problem converting sum, which is seen as an integer because the two numbers are integers from the previous step. And it cannot convert that into a string because it wants it as a string when it is executing the print statement. So you need to just be careful when working with an example like that. Let's look at the next example. Here we are inputting a name, and notice that because it's a name, names will be of a string data type. So there's no need for me to do any conversion in this instance. I'm inputting a cost and enter the cost of the item purchased, and you will notice it's being converted into an integer. The cost is being converted into an integer. I would like to suggest that the cost be converted into a float. Because we are working with a money value, cost, it's always good to have that being input, so that if the user chooses to input a point in the number, like 50 rands and 75 cents, then this will allow them to do that because I'm converting it into a float and not an integer. So after that conversion takes place and is stored in cost, we are doing our calculation to get the VAT. VAT is 15%, that's 15 divided by 100, and we are multiplying it to the cost. So that works out the VAT, and here is the message, the amount of VAT is, and then you're printing the variable VAT, and you're converting that into a string, so that the print statement has a message, which is a string, and the variable, which is converted into a string. So again, I'm going to copy that, and let's remove the previous program and paste the new program. We're going to input a name, and that's going to be a string. We're going to input the cost of the item purchased. That is converted into a float. And then we're doing a VAT conversion, which is 15%, 15 divided by 100. times the cost, and then we are displaying. So let's give that a run. It's asking me to enter my name. So I'm going to enter Zama. Enter the cost of the item. I'm going to type in 120 rands, 0.80. So I've got a point in it. When I press enter, it calculates the VAT and it prints it. And because it's a float, it's giving the answer that has many decimal points in it. So the answer is 18.119 repeatedly with a 7 at the end. For our purposes at this stage, we will be satisfied with this answer. At a later stage, we will see how to convert this to just have 2 decimal points in the answer. So these are just some of the examples that make use of input together with calculation, which is the process, and then you get the output in your Python program. I hope you understand how these programs work.